This downfall of Trudeau really speaks to the end of that era of the slick, PR-savvy technocrat politician who, every single thing that comes out of their mouths is just being workshopped and focus group to the nth degree. And that's really come down, and people see right through it. It just sounds so fake. But it seems like Trudeau took such a long time to realize that.
Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Ashley Frawley. Subscribe here, wherever you get your podcasts, and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Now, outgoing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau appeared on MSNBC Sunday. Among other standout moments from the interview, Trudeau told host Jen Psaki, who, by the way, let's not forget, was the White House press secretary for Joe Biden, not exactly a hard-hitting journalist. Trudeau said that he joked back and forth at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump about the U.S. annexing Canada. And then he said this.
And so this isn't out of the blue that he's doing this, but my focus has to be not on something that he's talking about that will not ever happen, but more on something that might well happen, that if he does choose to go forward with tariffs that raise the cost of just about everything for American citizens, that on top of that, we're going to have a robust response to that.
So Trump will be inaugurated in a matter of days now, obviously, and Trudeau will be Prime Minister of Canada until a successor is chosen. Last week, Trudeau's Liberal Party said that they would choose a new leader on March 9th. The Prime Minister election will have to happen sometime between May, probably, and at the very latest, October. So all that is to say, Trudeau and Trump will overlap once again, and Trump's plan is to implement much of his agenda very swiftly. So their relationship matters a lot right now because trade is a top Trump priority, and that could obviously hit Canada hard. In just that specific clash, we see the style and the substance of 2010s Obama, Clinton, Trudeau, Merkel, liberalism pitted against bombastic populism. Trump looks poised to win the battle, and Trudeau's downfall is a rebuke of his party and his brand, and that means something new is likely to step into the void, but we don't know what that could be. What might it be? Ashley Frawley is a senior editor at Compact and joins us today for some help answering that question and understanding what all of this means for Canada, the United States, and the West more broadly. Ashley Frawley, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, there's so many interesting takes right now on the arc of Justin Trudeau, sort of like the meme where he started and where he's finished, because it's like a fascinating arc. And, it says something, I think, about the arc itself of Western neoliberalism. But I wanted to get your take on that first. As we look back on the Trudeau era, is there something we can learn now that he's leaving as Trump is once again assuming office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? What do you think about that, Ashley?
Yeah, it's really difficult to parse at the moment. There's this sense that the sands are shifting beneath our feet, but I don't quite understand the kind of, I don't know, to mix metaphors, like the tectonic movements. So there's something happening sort of deep beneath the surface of our societies and governance. The Jacinda Arderns, the Justin Trudeaus, the Nicola Sturgeons of the world, they seem to be on their way out. And for a mode of governance that has dominated for a decade or more, and if you want to think about the sort of like progressive neoliberalism, several decades, seems to be on its way out, and it seems to have gone a little too easily. Yes, the population has turned against it. That whole hope and change branding has easily shifted toward a kind of realist cynicism. But I do wonder whether or not we are really seeing the end of that kind of that neoliberalism, or maybe it's transformation. So the thing that has concerned me is that I think a lot of Trump's supporters, a lot of the rhetoric surrounding Trump has very easily slipped into the same kinds of games that the left was playing, just without this kindly facade of faux empathy. So, this kind of the neoliberal governance that was represented by someone like Justin Trudeau was typified by this kind of politics of emotion around empathy and caring and, trauma and all these sorts of things. And are we seeing this transform into a politics of emotion, equally emotional, but around anger, resentment, but while its core remains unchanged? So I'm thinking, if we see Trump's recent appointments, there's this sense that, no matter who you push out of office, no matter who you elect, you're still going to get the same thing. So Trump's embrace of big tech, the whole H-1B visa debate really showed that kind of neoliberalism about, free movement of, capital goods, people, that sort of thing. It's still the order of the day. His appointing these conventional Wall Street figures like Howard Lutnick to key economic positions, it really makes you wonder, well, maybe all of that, what Trump did essentially was sort of branding the grievances of the working class. Well, maybe that's all it was. It was just branding at the end of the day.
What sense do you have of how that might change or not change? I think to your point, in Canada particularly. I mean, there's clearly been a vibe shift in the United States, and Trudeau is in trouble for political reasons. What comes after Trudeau, or what could come after Trudeau?
I think if you look at the trend, really since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since the end of really existing socialism, you saw that the former leftist, socialist, communist parties in Eastern Europe were competing with each other to show how neoliberal they could be, how pro-capitalist they could be. And populations became increasingly upset with this. They became increasingly unhappy with the way that they had very few sort of democratic options. And so what you had was this constant turnover of leaders and of governments. And that's really made its way slowly to us. And you see this kind of constant churn and this desire to have something completely different. And then once you get someone in office that's completely different, they are down the line to the technocrats, to the bureaucrats, promising, "Don't worry, I'll toe the line." And then when they come back to their constituents, in the case of these sort of right-wing, right-ish sorts of leaders, they'll go to their constituents and say something about gay marriage or lesbian mothers, and kind of play the culture war. When at the end of the day, nothing's really changed. And this happened, for instance, with Maloney, sort of promising that she could be, a figure of governance, and essentially saying, "I'm going to toe the line, don't worry." And then, hangs up the phone to Brussels, goes to the people and says something about, the gays, that sort of thing. And I do wonder, is that what we're going to get? This sort of like hammering in on the culture war as much. And with the H-1B visas, I thought that was really that whole debate started to show cracks in this very fragile coalition of, the Musks and the Trumps and their supporters. And as soon as that started to show, okay, hold on a second, all of these promises that you were making to the working class, particularly around immigration, you're just going to throw all of that out. Okay, so now despite this blue collar voter base, you're still beholden to free trade and corporate interests. And it was like, oh, grooming gangs. Why is the UK not? And to be fair, like that's a real issue. It's an important issue, but excuse me for being a little bit skeptical at the timing.
Let's pull at that thread, because when I think about the juxtaposition between January 6, 2021 and roughly around January 6, 2025, just Mark Zuckerberg in and of himself, that example is really interesting in that he was bending over backwards to absolutely appease every breath of criticism from the left after January 6th, and honestly, even leading up to January 6th, from 2016, after he got blamed for Trump's win, he just was becoming responsive to the Hillary Clinton complaints and all of that. Now, the reversal is so stunning, and it's not surprising, but it's a very stark contrast. And I look back on the trucker bank account freezing scandal under Trudeau, and I wonder, if that happened in 2025, would that, if we had like similar protests, would a Trudeau in 2025, 2026 ever do that again? Or have we sort of crossed the bright red line, at least for now, and we don't go back to that era of like cancel culture or whatever you want to call it, where you had Trudeau, somebody who's like with the Davos sect, using all of the tools of the state for political safetyism, essentially. Do you feel like that's been purged, or at least kind of on those issues, there's a bulwark up for now, and even if it's a branding thing? It's kind of interesting how it could be both.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the case that you can no longer get away with whatever you want because you've packaged it in the most inoffensive way possible. And for a long time, Obama, Trudeau, they were getting away with that. And those in power were quite pleased with that situation where you could, if you got a figure that, and I think that this downfall of Trudeau really speaks to the end of that era of the slick, PR savvy, technocrat politician who, every single thing that comes out of their mouths is just being workshopped and focus group to the nth degree. That's really come down, and people see right through it. It just sounds so fake. But it seems like Trudeau took such a long time to realize that. I mean, it was fairly recently where he tried to shut down criticism of his immigration policy by calling someone racist. Like that isn't going to work anymore. But, go back to 2015 when he was naming his cabinet and someone says, well, why 50-50 men and women? And he says, well, because it's 2015. And the audience laughed and clapped. That would not happen now. You'd groan and roll your eyes. So there's a realization that you can't get away with that anymore. And it seemed to take Trudeau a really, really long time. But does that mean that we see, the aesthetic of politics fading away in favor of the substance of politics? I'm not sure. I mean, you are seeing some really sweeping claims coming out of Trump's mouth and the potential for leaders in Canada who are within that same kind of grain, but of course aren't going to become the 51st state or whatever. um, but we are starting to see the rise of this different kind of statesman. But are we just going to get neoliberalism without the mask? I mean, in one sense, that's good because at least you know what you're getting. I've always said, like, I want, what I remember when Le Pen first took over the party of her father, and she said, we have to realize we can't say those things anymore. We can't talk like that anymore. And I thought that was really chilling because no, it wasn't that we can't like have these ideas. We have to rethink where we're going. Our mission is like, well, no, we have to change the way we speak. Like if you're racist, I want you to be as racist as possible. Just say it outright. I want to know exactly where we stand. I want to know exactly who you are. Say it plainly. So on the one hand, that's a good thing. But on the other hand, is it really better to have, that you had this like faux empathy mask that hid contempt? But is it better just to have open contempt and that's it? That's the substance of politics. This shifting from an aesthetic, a shift in an aesthetic, shift in an emotional orientation. That's kind of what it seems like to me. I'm seeing this sort of abandonment of that working class base. They're inklings of it in favor of a neoliberal status quo. Maybe because what Trump was hoping for in terms of reinvigorating the industrial base of America isn't possible. And in the face of that, he's proven himself all too willing to hand over the reins to the same old forms of neoliberal governance who don't really care how you package it as long as those policies come in, easy immigration, all of these sorts of things. Maybe it's too, even for a figure like Trump, who doesn't seem to care about the status quo and in fact rose to power on the promise of ripping it all up, maybe even for him it's impossible.
Yeah, and the American left is currently having a slightly more serious immigration debate in Congress, slightly more serious, where they're talking very seriously about what changes, amendments they could add to the Lake and Riley bill to make it something that they could actually vote for. Bernie Sanders, to your point about H-1B visas, came out swinging on the side of like Steve Bannon when that debate erupted. Is the Canadian left experiencing anything similar where they're realizing we need to have a response to have any power? I mean, it's a totally different sort of dynamic, but do you sense that the Canadian left, maybe even the left in Western Europe, in other places, if there are examples that strike you, is prepared to respond in a substantive way that could actually return them to power? Or are they really just lost and still sort of struggling to figure out what it's going to take?
I think they are lost. And to be fair, like the left's been lost for a very, very long time. And um, I think what worries me is that there isn't any opposition. It's been good to see some, some movement, some talk of immigration here and there, some labor supporters that are willing to talk about the way that immigration has been used as a stand-in for economic growth or a prop for economic growth at the expense of the working class. Um, but because the left has been overtaken by neoliberalism, this sort of kindly neoliberalism, really since the early 90s, that they have accepted that there is no alternative to capitalism, to neoliberalism, and that they kind of, just as the right does, accept that really it's human behavior and our inability to control ourselves and just this like darkness at the center of the human heart that really compels social problems because they've abandoned that kind of humanist core that was the legacy of the Enlightenment. Because for so long that stood in for the left. And the right has risen up and filled this vacuum of a counterculture. Now, if you're countercultural, that's overtaken by the right. It means that there's absolutely nothing to oppose what the right might want to do. And for a while, like that didn't really matter because, the torch of liberalism going, liberalism in the sense of like classical liberalism was really taken up by quote unquote conservatives. And for a long time, you could say, scratch beneath the surface of a conservative and really you find a classical liberal. And so that's in that sense, it's not really inconsistent that it was the conservatives who were propping up rights, who were defending freedom of speech. But on the other hand, you have real conservatives in the older sense of the right, this sort of like Volksgeist, this obsession with identity, emotion, cultural difference. That was the province of the right. Now we think of that as the left. Oh, of course you're obsessed with cultural difference and the unique spirit of the people and this sort of thing. That was very right wing in the past. But now you do have, this sort of a political realignment on the right where, yeah, the right is the right. They're starting to express identity politics. For a while you had this politics, the left had upheld this politics of grievance that was very feminized. And the right's equally upholding a politics of grievance that's just very masculinized. Like I made some silly joke in a public talk where I was sort of parodying things that people say women need, like, oh, for men to pick up the laundry off the floor or something like that. Or fine. And I was parodying the silly things that people say. And how many men in the comments were saying, oh, casual misandry here. And I was like, you're just so desperate to be a victim. So this sort of like victim politics has been coming up. And so what's happened now is that there's a lack of a firm foundation. There's nobody there who can really hold honestly and in a principled way the torch for rights like freedom of speech, the value of human reason, the ability, all of these things that actually underpin our liberal democratic societies.
Is Pierre Poilievre someone, let's say on a scale of Adam Smith to Steve Bannon, he strikes me as somebody who's much closer to Adam Smith. Where does he fit in the dynamic that you just outlined, which is who is left to defend freedom? It's identity politics, however you slice it, far left, far right. They've captured major parties. So where does he fit in as the person that anti-Trudeau forces, or at least many of them, trying to project their hopes onto? What does he look like?
Yeah, I guess it seems to me, and this is why I was saying that there's shifting sands beneath Trudeau's feet, but I don't exactly know what the forces are. Um, it's interesting because I wondered if Poilievre seemed like somebody who would be easier to meet Trump toe to toe. But interestingly, Trump didn't know who he was in August of last year. He was like, do they have good conservative people up there? I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Like he had absolutely no idea. So, it's obviously some politicking that's going on within the Canadian government, that there's this sense, this realization that Trudeau is never going to be able to get good terms from Trump. And let's put all of our hopes in Poilievre. Maybe, it's certainly, somebody who superficially appears to be that same kind of figure is somebody that will be able to um, get concessions more easily. Like Trudeau was just, you could see like Trump was completely emasculating him uh, on purpose, you know? And he was basically saying, look, I can do whatever I want to you and your country. You know, I'm going to make you the governor of the 51st state. Like it was, you know, quite a provocation. And so you needed somebody that at least could go to a negotiating table. And Trudeau couldn't do that. And he said, you know, obviously Canada is not going to become a state of the United States, and he's put some sort of firm positions down, but also demonstrated a kind of openness. So you can see he's trying to curry favor, and I think everybody is doing that at the moment, and that's the thing that I find so interesting, because everybody is going, you know, going down to Trump and sort of kissing the ring. And a part of me wonders whether this is a kind of groveling or if those in power in various countries are realizing that Trump might be an opportunity. For years, they had used absolutely everything at their disposal, lawfare, you know, just an absolute desperation to keep Trump out of the White House. Belatedly, there seems to be an acquiescence, a realization that Trump is here to stay at least for the next 4 years, and that maybe he might be the person that will do things that they could not do, that they would not have the courage to do. And so, like, the whole Greenland proposal is interesting because it strikes me as the sort of thing you'd hear maybe over scotch and cigars at some obscure conference somewhere. They said, "Well, what we really need to do is take Greenland," you know. But you know, somebody might be whispering. You know, perhaps I'm not giving him enough credit or agency. Pardon me if I'm not. But it does seem to me that somebody's whispering in his ear, like, "Your predecessors didn't have the courage to do what needs to be done." You know, so like the craziest policies might actually make their way through, not with a kindly branding because they never could, but with a Trump branding, and then gain that kind of edge that, you know, this Trump's just trying to do business. And if you can kind of frame things as a win for Trump, maybe you could get some of your wildest dreams as a policymaker, as an economist, um, as a planner, as you know, now I think people are starting to realize, for better or for worse, that if you can play Trump's game, or at least appear to be playing it, maybe you can get what you never dared demand in the past.
Mm. Ashley, that is so interesting. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's edition of Undercurrents. We are here in Washington, D.C. There's all kinds of activity happening inside the Beltway over the next month, especially over the next week. We will be here to cover it, so make sure to subscribe to the channel wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. We'll be back with more soon.